Welcome to Exhuming the Truth, the podcast where we delve into the mysterious world of cold cases, missing persons, true crime, and the fascinating science that is forensics. I'm forensic scientist and criminologist Asha Walther, and I am so thrilled to have you with me on this journey as we dance in the shadows of the world of crime, shining a light on scientific discovery while becoming another voice for those who need it most. So grab a drink and get comfortable while we jump into this episode together. As always, I would like to extend a content and trigger warning. This podcast is recommended for persons over the age of 18 and contains explicit content not suitable for minors. We will be covering sensitive content that ranges from sexual assault, physical, mental, social and emotional abuse, suicide, homicide, murder, attempted murder, and other violent crimes, including crimes involving weapons and drugs. This often extends to drug misuse and other harmful and illegal activity. If you find any content to be distressing, I have listed a number of resources that may be able to help you in the podcast notes. I would also like to remind our listeners that all victims and all perpetrators are someone's loved one, so I ask that any discussions in our group or on our social accounts remain respectful of that at all times. And by listening, you acknowledge that all persons of interest remain innocent until proven otherwise. Good morning, afternoon, or evening, where it is, wherever you're listening to from today. I have officially declared that Thursday is the hottest day in Perth every week. It probably is not, but it definitely feels like it. It happens to only be when I sit down to record that it is so hot in this room. Today it was 38 degrees and there is a current active cyclone warning on the east coast as we burn over here. The contrast is insane. I have been nursing two sick children this week, which is not ideal at all since we leave for Bali next week. However, they're on the mend and I can't wait for our little getaway. Episodes will still remain while I am away. I have that covered. We have different things planned for our time in Bali, but personally I am most excited as I have been in touch with a wonderful local lady in Bali. She owns an independent dog rescue, and I have organised to go there and help her out and give all my love to the fur babies while I'm missing my own. And honestly, if I could do that every single day for the entire holiday, I would be more than satisfied. And yes, I have also looked at the process in bringing one home, and that is just impossible for me right now, so we won't be doing that. Honestly, if I could hang out there every day, I would be just so happy. But unfortunately, it's a family holiday and I don't think my family will approve of that. She has spoken to me about the circumstances of saving these dogs and puppies, and it's awful. There's also a lot of honour killings going on with them, so I'm looking forward to physically helping out, but I also want to see how we can help out in the long term. So keep an eye out on the social media for Exhuming the Truth next week. I'll share some photos when I arrive and when I've been with the puppies. That's really about all I have to waffle on about this week because it has honestly been the longest week of all time organising for the pets when we're away and caring for sick kids day and night. Everything's just sort of merged into one. Honestly, this week has felt like a year. I have to say for our Friday feels, that's the only name I've got, guys. If you've got something else, please tell me. But the hardest part of my week was definitely coping with my nursing duties on the serious side, but on the little bit funny side. One of my little dogs, Jock, he is a sausage dog cross Chihuahua cross Maltese, so he's identical to Harry McCleary, so if you know, you know. If not, that's a little black hairy dog that looks ridiculous, and that is Jock. He is such a bizarre little dog. He's such a grumpy little man, and he only just turned 2, and he's just got the most fierce personality of all time. And I decided to give him a little makeover before he goes to my friends next week, and I am no way a dog groomer or a hairdresser. So I have been proclaiming for the last however long, but I totally messed it up. His beautiful fluffy long hair is now like incredibly short. There are some bald patches, and he now very closely resembles a poodle with a really bad haircut. It honestly feels like he is a different dog, and I can't stop laughing every time he looks at me. I think he's feeling a little self-conscious and possibly a little cold, but also it is 38, so on the inside he could be happy, who knows. But I think, yeah, That's definitely my regret of the week. Every time I look at him, I think, oh my God, what have I done? But the highlight of my week was actually onboarding some really interesting and amazing people as future guests for you guys. Behind the scenes, I'm always working every day, trying to improve the podcast, trying to add new things, and trying to onboard some really awesome people for you guys to listen to and get to know. So we have that to look forward to. I'll be getting into the guests when we get back from Bali, just because I don't think I'm going to manage my time very well while I'm over there in terms of interviewing guests and producing really great interviews. So I'd rather wait till we get home, but we have that to look forward to. But anyway, I hope you had a beautiful week wherever you're listening from. Thank you so much for being here, and let's jump into this week's episode. Let me take you to the waterside suburb of Bayview in Sydney's northern beaches, just a short journey north of Sydney's CBD. It's 1982, and Bayview is a friendly residential area with family homes, waterfront properties, and bushland surrounds. Bayview was then, as it remains, a high-income suburb, with many of the homes offering waterfront access or stunning views of Pittwater. Pittwater is host to yacht clubs, marinas, and a picturesque sailing culture. In the 1980s, public transport was not as frequent or direct, so many of the residents of Bayview relied on their private vehicles. A beautiful, welcoming area with low crime rates and a semi-rural feel nearby to schools and amenities. What more could you want? A family house down Gilwinder Drive, a quiet residential street in Bayview, was then home to the Dawson family. Comfortable but not extravagant, their homes sit in a short distance from the water. The Dawson family was then made up of Chris Dawson. He was a PE teacher at a local high school who had since retired from playing professional rugby. Chris Dawson's wife was Lynette Joy Dawson, previously known as Lynette Sims, who was born in 1948 in Sydney, Australia. The pair wed in 1970. Lynette was described as gentle, kind, and a devoted mother who adored her two young daughters. Friends and family said she was softly spoken. She was trusting and deeply in love with her husband Chris, despite noticeable signs of his controlling behaviour. Before she was a mum, Lynette was a full-time nurse. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to infer that she was a responsible, caring, and intelligent woman, carrying those qualities into motherhood. The pair shared two beautiful young daughters. Despite adoring her role as a full-time mother, they had their hands full, and it wasn't long before they decided to hire a nanny. The nanny was a 16-year-old girl called Joanne Curtis, also known as JC. JC was recruited by Chris Dawson from his workplace as her teacher. She was a current student at the Cromer High School. Chris and JC engaged in an affair, and Lynette was aware of what was happening. Lynette loved her husband and wanted to save her marriage, and even suggested marriage counselling. December 1981, Lynette spent Christmas with her family, showing no signs of wanting to end her marriage with her husband Chris. In early January of 1982, Chris had convinced Lynette to take a short break at their family's holiday home in Gilgandra in order to allegedly clear her head. On the 8th of January, Lynette had phoned her mother. She was content. She showed no signs of stress, and she was planning to see her mother in the near future. Come January the 9th, she was never to be seen or heard from again. The immediate aftermath can be very telling in a case so complex. Chris Dawson did not report his wife as missing. Instead, he told family and friends that she had left him and their girls voluntarily. To add to his narrative, Chris claims Lynette phoned him on the 9th of January, stating that she needed to take time away and that she had taken the liberty to join a religious group. Only days later, Chris moved Joanna Curtis into the family home. If suspicions were not already raised, one can only wonder why. So who reported Lynette missing? Helena Sims, Lynette's adoring mother, was the first person to raise concern for the sudden disappearance of her daughter, Lynette. Helena went weeks without contact with her daughter. that was not typical. In those weeks, she had begged Chris to file a missing persons report, to which he did not. Thank you to her persistence, finally, Chris reported Lynette missing in February of 1982, more than 1 month after she vanished. Lynette's clothing and belongings remained untouched. She had not packed any items or taken any money from any accounts. 1 year later, Chris Dawson marries Joanne Curtis. It wasn't long until they had a baby together. 1 year. No leads. Suspicion remained. Lynette's family never believed she would abandon her children like that. Police start to reinvestigate the case, but Chris Dawson refuses to cooperate. It wasn't until then that rumours picked up that Chris had murdered his then wife and buried her in or near their Bayview home. In 1998, Joanne Curtis leaves the relationship with Chris and speaks out, telling police about his violent and controlling behaviour. She also says she always felt Lynette had been murdered, but Chris had manipulated her into silence. It wasn't until 2001 that police do their first excavation of the former Bayview home of the Dawsons. Though they don't find a body, they find a woman's cardigan buried in the backyard. But the cardigan lacked the appropriate forensic trace evidence to prove it belonged to Lynette. A coronial inquest into the case, initiated in 2001 by the New South Wales coroner, concluded that Lynette Dawson was more than likely to be deceased and that she had likely been murdered by a person known to her. The coroner also recommended that Chris Dawson be charged, but the recommendation fell on deaf ears. It wasn't until 2003, when a second coronial inquest was opened, which ultimately reached the same outcome, that Lynette was murdered. Again, no charges were laid. In 2018, journalist Hedley Thomas picks up the case and decides to create a podcast, The Teacher's Pet. The podcast exposes Chris Dawson's past, leading to a new and heavy public pressure to investigate Lynette's disappearance further. Come December, Chris Dawson was ultimately arrested and charged with the murder, but was not convicted until 2022. He was seen in front of Judge Justice Ian Harrison in August and was found guilty despite not recovering her remains. The court ruled that he likely killed her on January the 8th, 1982, and disposed of her body with the intention to be with Joanne Curtis, the babysitter and student, with no distractions of his then wife Lynette. He was sentenced to 24 years in prison. At the time of Lynette's disappearance, Chanel Dawson was just 4 years old and Sharon Dawson was just 2 years old. So, my friends, let's take a look at how the police built their case against Chris Dawson if they had no forensic evidence and why they didn't look into Chris sooner. The case built on Chris Dawson was largely a case of circumstances. The key evidence provided in the court was that ultimately there was no proof of life. So there were no phone calls, letters, bank activity or sightings of Lynette around the immediate time after she went missing, nor was there any of that activity into the future. So that is basically how they perform a proof of life check. They check Medicare, healthcare records to see if there's been any movement or activity. So that's what they had done here. So we align this with Chris's claims that she left voluntarily, or in his words, ran away, and also that she phoned him on the 9th of January. So the court used the inference that if she had phoned Chris to share her whereabouts on the 9th of January, it is likely that she would phone her mother and other people in her circle, and it is highly unlikely she would phone only Chris. To support the fact that she did not call on the 9th of January, there was also no evidence provided to say that she did. Next is there are multiple witnesses who describe Lynette as a devoted mother. So we like to take into account her loved ones, her friends, people who know her and can tell us what is Lynette's personality. What does she usually do? What does she love? And this really helps in situations like this. So a sudden and permanent absence from her children was entirely uncharacteristic and inexplicable. Now, I can say as a mother, I know I can't speak for all mothers, but I think I can confidently speak for a lot of us when I say that if I am reported missing and I have not contacted my children or have just left my children and intend to never see them again, you can assume with 110% confidence that I am dead, because that is just never going to happen. There is no way I could or would ever do that. So I think that is evidence enough. Although it's not a fingerprint, it is very telling to the circumstances of the method of her disappearance. She has a bunch of people who know and love her and know what she loves and what she's like, saying she would never leave her children. I think that speaks very heavily. But in saying that, there is only one person in the case that claims she had run away or left willingly, and that person is Chris Dawson. Next, and as we spoke about earlier, Chris delayed reporting her missing. That's a massive red flag. Had it not been for Lynette's mother not even suggesting but pressuring him to report her missing, I do not believe he would have, and I assume the courts do not believe that either. If Lynette had truly voluntarily left, she would have theoretically needed money, transport, and if she didn't need transport and she was walking, then there would have been witnesses. She would have needed clothing, probably many other things. None of these things were touched. All of her items were left untouched. Routine activity is a big one in criminal investigations. Watching someone's typical movements can help determine what likely could have and might happen into the future. It's noted in basically every report that Chris moved the 16-year-old student into the family home only days after his wife allegedly took off. I think we're all thinking the same thing here, and I think it is a very safe assumption to say that this literal move suggests that Lynette being disposed of was heavily premeditated in order for Chris to have a relationship with the student without his wife getting in the way. So, in better wording or not, he definitely looks like he's gotten rid of his wife so he can have a relationship with this young girl. Then, of course, we have statements from this girl, the student, who later went on to marry him and have a child with him. So she, in my opinion, she's in no way innocent in this. But when she left the marriage, she told the authorities that he was controlling and that he was violent. So to speak to his character is really huge. I do believe her, and it seems others do believe her, otherwise they would not have come to such a conclusion and taken her statement into account, But she also states that she always suspected that Lynette had been murdered. So I just wish, if she thought that this was the case, that she may have said something to someone rather than marrying and procreating with this man. But we can't change the past or assume what was going on, because it is noted that this girl was groomed from as young as age 15. So we really don't know what would have been going on through her head during such a time, but the fact that she ultimately came out with what she said really helped the police's case, and it helped the police's case against Chris Dawson. So this is huge. One really big thing with witnesses and people in court, or in a court trial in general, is credibility. So the court and its people and the people of the public want to know that they can trust a statement, a witness statement, or a statement that's spoken. How do they decide that they trust that statement? Well, if they have picked up on the same person changing their story or even lying, or being caught in a contradiction of their own words, that's a pretty telltale sign of an untrustworthy person. So you can typically see if somebody's made an honest and genuine mistake and they own up to that. But Chris told different versions of why Lynette had disappeared, such as she ran away with a religious group, she abandoned him, she abandoned the kids, she was living somewhere else, she didn't want to be found. None of the claims could be backed with any evidence whatsoever, like none of any of those claims that he had made. So that comes back to the phone call. He's claiming all these things were said over the phone call, so there's no evidence of any of that at all. So also taking into account the statements from external witnesses, such as Lynette's family and her friends, they support the contrary to what he's saying, which is huge. So as we said, it's absolutely not in her character to ever abandon her children. She had never expressed intentions of leaving her husband to anybody. She had expressed the intention of making plans to see family members in the future. So when she phoned her mum on January the 8th, she intended to see her mum in the future. She intended to see her mother and be there in the future. She had no intention of leaving. Chris's previous behaviour was also taken into account, where he had patterns of inappropriate relationships with teenage students, as we can see obviously with JC, but other Cromer High School students did reveal that Chris and his twin brother Paul were known for preying on schoolgirls. The impact of the Teacher's Pet podcast actually ended up being a critical key in reopening the case, which then further led to Chris's arrest. Firstly, it brought massive public awareness as the case was known, but it wasn't as widely known and it reached much further than it had previously after the podcast. It actually ended up with millions of people tuning in all over the world, so it was actually really great in terms of weight and pressure. It also recovered witnesses, so it had witnesses that had come forward saying that they were too afraid to speak earlier, which was also fantastic. It went over the failures of the police at the time too, which I think is great and is also a huge component of this case. And how they overlooked Chris Dawson early on. They didn't do much at all. In my opinion, ultimately, public attention forces the governing bodies to take action. And that's what's happened here. So that's another great thing about podcasting, social media and things like that. Yes, there are certainly negatives. Yes, a podcast and social media can absolutely interfere with a case. But in this case, it's done the opposite, and I think that's absolutely fantastic. So how did the case close with a murder charge? Without a body, essentially, a no-body murder. The prosecution relied entirely on circumstantial evidence here to prove that Chris had motive and opportunity. So the Teacher's Pet podcast exposed hidden details, brought witnesses to the spotlight again, and pressured authorities to act, like we just spoke about. This case actually remains one of our country's most high-profile murder investigations. That's due to the media coverage. It was insane. The role of investigative journalism taking the reins in seeking justice for Lynette, and it was also a no-body murder, which is not common to prosecute a no-body murder case. So I want to take a deeper look into Chris Dawson and Joanna Curtis. How did they come about? Who are they? So Christopher Michael Dawson was born in 1948 in Sydney. He was a former rugby league player. And then he became a high school teacher, so he was teaching physical education. He and Lynette married in 1970 and had 2 daughters together. He initiated the affair with the student Joanne Curtis when she was 15 to 16 years of age, and she was a student at Cromer High School, the high school where he worked as the PE teacher. Joanne Curtis was born in 1965, and she began her relationship with Chris as part of a student-teacher affair. However, she lived with her mother in 1981, but was slowly but surely increasing her stays in the Dawson home. And then, as we know, she was moved into the Dawson home entirely just a few days after Lynette disappeared. So we spoke about it briefly before, but to give the years, the pair married in 1984. They had a daughter together. They divorced in 1990. It's reported that she left him due to his controlling behaviour. So again, this made her a crucial witness in the 2022 trial. I think without her statement, it would have been a bit difficult, but she did state that he was manipulative and possessive. She also added that Chris had frequently spoken about wanting to get rid of Lynette prior to her disappearance. So that is enormous and crucial information. So a couple of takeaways that I've obviously mentioned, but I want to really drill in there. Chris Dawson groomed Joanne Curtis as a teenager while married. This is all about his character, okay? Lynette's disappearance conveniently cleared the way for him to live with Joanne. Joanne ultimately was a key witness at this trial. Despite no physical evidence, Dawson was convicted based largely on witness testimonies and circumstantial evidence. So if you want to sit and unravel the timeline, Chris worked at the Cromer High School, where JC was a student. The distance between Cromer High School and his Bayview home was approximately 12 kilometres. So in 1982, by car, The drive took approximately 15 to 20 minutes depending on traffic. So it's likely that the route he took back in that time would have been via Monavale Road and Pittwater Road, because those were the main ways in the area at the time. So if we're looking at that, this means that Chris had enough time to go back and forth between work and home easily, which is very important in the timeline of Lynette's disappearance. So just keep that one in your mind. This is a little ASHA analysis for you, and this is how deep I like to dive by checking roads and Google Maps back at the time and how long it would have taken, because he thinks he was at work, couldn't have possibly. But if we look at his daily routine prior to the event, he had a reasonably predictable schedule. Leave for work in the morning, return from work in the afternoon, and essentially prey on young women during the day. There are numerous witnesses reported that he left campus, and I quote, unexpectedly, which was not usual according to his daily routine. So this was on the day. The area of the school and the residence offered access to remote locations for disposal. So I've had a little aerial look, and we have, excuse my pronunciation here, the Wackhurst Parkway and the Ku-ring-gai Chase National Park. So both of these locations are relatively secluded areas of bushland, very accessible to him. This case was especially lucky in my opinion, as when it came to the court, it was seen by a judge only. And why do I like judge only, you may ask? Well, you probably didn't, but I'll tell you anyway. But because the judge knows the law. I never thought about this until my own court case, but the judge has studied that law and knows how to apply that law. So yes, having jury opinion is good sometimes, I think. Actually, I don't, so don't ask me when it's been good, because I honestly have no reference to a time it has been good. But I personally would prefer all cases to be seen by a judge only. I honestly believe that jury comes with bias. It naturally comes with bias. They're just people. We're all just people, and it takes many, many years of practice to remove any type of bias when you're dealing with the law. I know that doing miscarriages of justice in forensics, it's really hard to remove any bias that you have. And I think a judge, they go through so much training for that, and we don't. So it's easy for them to black and white look at the law and apply that law. So anyway, but because Chris was tried by a judge alone, I think the outcome was as best as it could have been given there's nobody. I honestly think if there was a jury there, things could have been very different. I actually purchased a book about this written by one of Lynette's daughters. I'm unsure which one. I think it might have been Sharon, but I could be wrong. Don't quote me. I bought that for my mum for her birthday, and she doesn't like to read, but she read it all in a matter of days. I haven't read it myself. I'm really keen to. But that's out there if you want to have a little Google search and have a read. But anyway, so to convict Chris, they would have to prove that she was in fact dead. So to convict a no-body murder, you have to prove that a life has been lost, essentially. So they can confirm that without a body by saying, well, we have done a proof of life. So we've checked bank movements, healthcare movements, sighting, etc. And there's nothing of that sort at all. So we can safely assume that there is no more life in that case. And then they would go on to use all of the evidence we spoke about earlier to support motive and opportunity for him. And there's plenty of that. This was actually the first major Australian no-body murder conviction, which is enormous. I think we struggled on, can we convict somebody for this? So it shows us that circumstantial evidence is in fact enough. It's strong enough evidence to prove guilt. We don't have to rely solely on forensic evidence alone, which is fantastic for cases like these and where they just won't admit guilt or give up the location of the body. So instead of a forensic fail this week, I just want to raise a few questions for you to take away, because this case, it got me, and the lack of movement in investigation early on, I just don't think it's good enough. So I want to leave you with a few questions. The only thing that I am left with in cases of no bodies such as this and Haley Dodd, are we really going to allow one man, one mind, one narrow mind, that thinks that the solution to all his troubles is to take a life? Are we going to let this man outsmart every other being in the country and not find Lynette? How are we not still looking for her? Why do search efforts ever cease in the first place? Who draws that line that says we quit or there is no hope here? Because there is always hope. I don't want to hear about resources or lack thereof. If one man can dispose of a body, other men and women can come together and find where he did that and give her the dignity of a burial. This is what drives me in Nobody Murders work. Lynette is still out there. Her remains still exist. And they wait in the weather to be found by someone so she can finally go home. That brings us to the end of this episode. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you've enjoyed it here. If so, you can subscribe to stay up to date on new episodes, or you can find us both on Instagram and Facebook. Please feel free to jump onto our Facebook group to join in on the case discussions. You can find the link to our group in the podcast notes. I'm Asha Walther, and as always, stay curious, stay informed, and until next time, trust your instincts and keep seeking the truth.